The microphone squealed as my father pulled it close and smiled the kind of smile that cuts. "She's just a fat, hollow soldier," he told the room voice, warm as a toast, cold as a blade. Laughter broke across the round tables in uneven ripples. He slung an arm around my half-brother's shoulders and lifted his glass. "This is my heir, a future elite pilot." The ballroom at the Lakeview American Legion smelled like coffee roast beef and floor wax. Flags bracketed the stage state to the left, stars and stripes to the right, a POW MIA banner in the back. I kept my hands laced and let the old ache rise, not injury, but memory, trying to commandeer the present. I could have walked out. I didn't. I squared my shoulders and let the hurt sharpen my spine. Peter 26 and movie trailer handsome stood there the way boys do when they've been told they were destined. Dad went on about discipline and legacy and blood that runs on jet fuel. People nodded because people nod for a confident man with medals on his lapel. 3 tables over the hush changed shape. A retired sergeant leaned forward, jaw like a brick. The woman beside him reached for her glasses. A phone screen lit up. A kid in a ROTC blazer mouthed a name I'd learned to live with and to ignore. "Wait," the sergeant said, standing before he decided to. His chair scraped. "Aren't you the Phantom?" My father's sentence stalled. He turned in the lights and finally intentionally looked at me. The DJ's big band track clicked off. For a second, the only sound was an ice cube cracking in a glass. "The F-22 pilot." The sergeant finished voice gone softer. I didn't nod. I didn't need to. Recognition is louder than applause. The whisper leapt table to table like a spark in dry grass. "Phantom. Phantom. Phantom." Dad cleared his throat. "Folks," he said, chuckling across gravel, "let's not confuse rumor with—" "Sir," a woman in a navy blazer said, stepping from the wall. I briefed a joint exercise where she flew red air. "You don't forget a pilot who disappears on radar and reappears exactly where the plan needs her." She gave me the smallest nod a person can give and still mean the world. Peter's smile froze. The camera in his date's hand trembled. I felt bad for him. It isn't a boy's fault when someone builds a pedestal under his feet and forgets to leave a ladder. "I'm fine," I said, soft for the nearest table, loud enough for my father. "Please finish your speech." But speeches unravel once a room changes its mind. The VFW table straightened. The ROTC kid had my photo on his screen helmet under my arm canopy behind me, like a silver eyelid call sign stenciled beneath. Dad gripped the mic as if it were a lifeline. For a long time, my father preferred facts that agreed with him. He liked the fact of my weight more than the fact of my wings. He could carry one into any room and drop it like a brick. The other asked for humility, that his daughter had done the one thing he said she couldn't. Tonight, Dad tried again. "We're here to celebrate the next generation of aviators. Peter has worked hard," I said, "because truth costs nothing to the person who already paid full price. He will be good if he learns to love discipline after the applause is gone." Peter flinched, not from cruelty, but from an angle of truth he hadn't met. I didn't want to hurt him. I wanted the casual harm to stop. A woman at the dessert table clapped once. Another joined. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was a change in pressure, like a hangar door opening. "Phantom," the sergeant said again, testing the word. "Ma'am, did you fly the winter scramble over the ridge fires 2 years back? My nephew was in the Guardbirds that night." "I did," I said. "Your nephew has steady hands." He blinked fast. "You brought him home." My father found me, then not as a mark to correct, but the way a man finds a horizon he didn't know he'd lost. Behind his eyes, something old flickered. He could step toward me or away. The pause lasted a heartbeat and a decade. Until he saw my face, I thought, and then heard him try my call sign. "Wait," Dad said, voice lower. "Aren't you the Phantom?" The microphone wasn't necessary anymore. Half the room had already answered for him. I hadn't planned to reveal anything tonight. I planned to eat a polite dinner and leave before the speeches softened into old stories. But truth arrives on time, whether you invite it or not. So I let it land gear down nose wheel, kissing a floor that smelled like wax and second chances. The master of ceremonies hunted for his place in a script that suddenly felt thinner than the napkins. "Let's have a round of applause for both our pilots," he said. Safety was its own kind of bravery. The clapping that followed wasn't thunder. It was weather hands, finding each other, minds catching up to eyes. Peter looked at me the way a younger sibling looks at the one who went first through a dark room and found the light switch. I lifted my glass. "To the next generation," I said and meant it. "May they learn what legacy actually weighs." My father stared like a man trying to read a map in a storm. Habit wrestled with pride. He lowered the mic. He didn't apologize. He didn't have to. The apology had already begun without him, in the way a room refuses to laugh at a joke it has heard too many times. Across the parquet, the flags hardly moved. The air felt steady for the first time that night. Outside, a small wind bent the lake into 1,000 silver ridges. I set my glass down and took a breath that reached the bottom of my lungs. You can't control how people introduce you. You can control whether you stand there and let the introduction be the truth. That was the moment I decided I would tell the story myself. I grew up in the slipstream of a man who believed order could keep chaos out. My father, retired Air Force Colonel Walter Hale, measured Saturdays in chores and weeknights in push-ups. He ironed his shirts with the kind of attention most men reserve for prayer. Shoes at 45 degrees by the door, beds tight enough to bounce a quarter, dinner at 1800, not 6 o'clock. He said the numbers mattered because precision did. I learned to read the face of a clock the way some kids learn to read clouds to see if a storm was coming. On base, everything spoke his language. The housing rows were square as graph paper. The lawns crew cut short. We shopped the commissary and pretended the fluorescent lights were gentler than they were. If you've never waited in line behind a staff sergeant counting coupons with a toddler on her hip and another in the cart, you might not know what American service looks like up close. I do. Mom used to squeeze my hand in those lines. "This is what holding a country together looks like," she'd whisper like it was a secret we were lucky to keep. At 10, I built balsa airplanes at the kitchen table, while Dad read the paper with a toothpick between his teeth. Mom would slide a placemat under my mess and say, "Lift, darling," not drag, as if she could talk wings into being. She taught English at the high school off base and brought home paperbacks soft from other hands. The books were full of people who ran toward what scared them. It seemed familiar. Every August, Dad took us to the air show. He didn't go to watch, he went to evaluate. He'd stand at the fence line with a ball cap low and his jaw set naming airframes as if he were taking roll call. F-16, A-10, T-38. When the Thunderbird screamed over the crowd, flinched, and then laughed the way people do when fear turns into joy in their chests. I watched the pilots' taxi visors down the world mirrored on their faces and felt something slide into place inside me, a gear meeting its teeth. "Don't get ideas," Dad said once following my stare. "Those seats aren't built for daydreamers." Mom coughed into her sleeve to cover her protest. "They're built for pilots, Walter. Let her finish the sentence." He shrugged. "Girls have other kinds of sentences to finish." I tucked that away, not as a wound, yet more like a note pinned to a corkboard for later. Puberty arrived with a stubbornness I admired in everything else. My body put on weight like armor, even when I ran laps around the block until my lungs felt like scorched canvas. Dad called me kiddo when he wanted to be kind, and soldier when he wanted me to be better. Scale numbers turned into scorecards. On Saturday mornings, he'd tap the bathroom door with a knuckle. Discipline is love in a language the future understands. "Does the future speak any other languages?" I asked, once too salty for a 13-year-old. He smiled without warmth. "Results." Peter came along when I was 12. A surprise that wasn't a surprise if you paid attention to the distance between my parents at the dinner table. A year later, Mom moved into a small apartment with an upstairs neighbor who played the violin. She kissed my forehead, told me to keep reading the weather before I flew and left with 2 suitcases and her best casserole dish. Dad remarried the kind of woman who looked camera-ready, even at the mailbox. She loved Peter with a fierceness that was beautiful and efficient. She loved me politely, like an exchange student who might leave at any time. If you are older and listening to this, you know how families drift. We don't mean to. We follow currents we don't name. At 14, I joined Civil Air Patrol because a flyer on the guidance counselor's corkboard said orientation flights. The county airfield smelled like avgas and hot tar. Mr. Grady, the volunteer instructor, had a voice scraped by Marlboros and memories. Back seat of an F-4 in 72, he told me, patting the Cessna 1-72 like it was a reliable dog. I can teach you to fly. Can't teach you to want it. I already do, I said. He squinted. Good. Want is the only fuel you can buy when the world says you're empty. I soloed on a wind-calm afternoon, the color of unfinished aluminum. When the wheels kissed back down and the Cessna settled like a sigh, Mr. Grady held up 3 fingers from the taxiway. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but joy felt private like prayer. On the drive home, I told Dad. He nodded, listening like a commander accepting a report. Nice hobby, he said. Now pass your algebra test. He never came to the airfield. He didn't forbid it. He starved it of oxygen. High school was a run of hallways. I took at speed. JROTC taught me what ROTC would expect. The drill team taught me that precision can make strangers move as one. On Fridays, I'd lift in a weight room that smelled like old rubber and boys. I never broke the mile time my coach wanted, but I could hold a plank until girls stopped watching to see if I'd collapse. When I shaved a minute off my 5K by spring of junior year, Dad handed me a donut at the kitchen table the next morning and said, "Reward." He never saw how confused a gift feels when it's wrapped in a test. If you're nodding, it's because you've raised a kid or been one under the gaze of someone who thinks love is a scoreboard. Peter got the language of praise early and fluently. He had a runner's body and a gymnast's confidence. At a 4th of July barbecue, Dad introduced him to a lieutenant colonel from the Guard as the next great Hale pilot. When the man turned to me, Dad added, "She's the smart one, college material. Not built for G's." The words landed with the casual finality of fence posts. I smiled and asked the colonel about his unit's maintenance crews until he laughed and called me trouble. I took it as a benediction. I applied for ROTC scholarships with the same focus I used to tighten a harness. Essays at 0100. Say T words like rivets. When the acceptance packet landed in our mailbox, thick promising, I held it like it might lift if I let it. Dad skimmed the pages and grunted. "You'll have to pass the fitness assessment." "I will," I said. He glanced at my waist the way a man checks weather before taking off. "We'll see." There are worse fuels than doubt. They burn hot and smoky, but they move an engine. I ran before dawn. I traded sugar for sleep. I learned that cardio doesn't care about your feelings, it cares about your feet. The day I cleared the PT threshold, I wrote Mr. Grady a letter on county stationery and tucked 2 snapshots inside me in a cheap Blazer scholarship in hand. Me on the tarmac, a Cessna behind me, hair in a bun, grin like a landing light. He sent back a postcard, "Proud of your lift. Watch your angle of attack." I watched it. Through ROTC, through survival training, through the first time, a major's tone suggested I was an interloper in my own ambition. Whenever someone called me big girl with a smirk, I banked the insult like altitude. It's not that I accepted the weight commentary. It's that I refused to make my body the battlefield when there were real ones waiting. When pilot selection boards came, I sat in a chair that had outlived entire careers and answered questions like, I was calling a checklist. Why aviation? Because the first time I felt entirely myself, I was alone in a sky that didn't care who my father was. Greatest weakness, I tell the truth, even when it costs me applause. They frowned at that. Then they stamped a paper and a door opened. Dad did not throw a party. He bought me a pen and said, "Officers sign things." He was right and not right. Officers sign, but more importantly, they choose. A path, a standard, a way to fail and try again. If you're listening and older than me, you already know the most dangerous thing a person can do is try to win a parent's scoreboard. The points change when you aren't looking. I stopped trying. That's when the numbers started adding up anyway. There's a photograph in a shoebox somewhere, me at 21, standing by a T6 on a runway that looked longer than my future. I am not thin in that photo. I am not hollow in any of them. I look like a woman who understands that gravity is not a verdict. It is a fact to be managed with lift speed and angle. By the time I touched the F-22's yoke, I had learned the only lesson that ever mattered: you cannot fly to be seen. You fly to be worthy of landing. Undergraduate pilot training taught me that sky-wanting and sky-worthy are not the same thing. You show up with a jaw set like a parking brake, and they hand you a flight suit, a stack of manuals thick as a phone book, and a schedule that shaves you down to what you actually believe. Dawn briefs. Chair flying in a plastic seat until your hips ache. Emergency procedures whispered into the steam of bad coffee. You memorize numbers until they move into your bones. V-speeds, climb gradients, fuel flows, so that when your brain goes loud, your marrow can still do math. The T6 Texan II is a bright, honest teacher. If you're sloppy on the rudder, it tells you. If you horse the yoke, it scolds you with buffet and attitude you haven't earned. My first takeoffs were fine. My first landings belonged to someone who had read about landings in a book and hadn't yet made friends with the ground. Pitch for airspeed power for glide path, my instructor said, tapping the window with a pen cap as if the horizon needed emphasis. I took the advice home like homework. I taped a line of blue painter's tape across my dorm room wall at eye level and taught my eyes to stop chasing the world and start trusting level. The physical machine that was another truth. The flight surgeon drew blood, took EKGs, squinted at charts without smiling. "Your numbers are good," she said, "but your frame puts you closer to limits when we spin up the Gs." It wasn't a lecture. It was physics. The centrifuge greeted me like a carnival ride's mean cousin. At 4 Gs, my cheeks tugged south. At 5, my vision tunneled. At 6, a dull siren sounded in my skull, not fear, but the body's old language for this is where we usually quit. I practiced the anti-G straining maneuver until it felt as ridiculous as it sounded, grip, breathe, lock, and then I practiced more. On my second run, the lights pinwheeled, then steadied. I walked out of that room with a headache and a smile I didn't put on for anyone. There are washout days no one photographs. The day I over-rotated on a short field landing and pogoed the gear like a kid on a trampoline, my instructor took the controls and saved the airplane from my pride. Back on the ramp, he didn't yell. "Debrief in 10, he said, and left me alone with my helmet and the little mirror inside it where a pilot meets her eyes. I owned my mistake aloud. We flew the same profile at dawn the next day, and I greased it so clean even the crew chief said, "Ma'am, short victories matter. They buy you enough belief to pay tomorrow's bills." I called home every few weeks, never on a bad day. Dad's questions were checklists disguised as conversation. "How's your instrument scan? What's your fuel plan? You wearing the uniform, right?" When I told him I was ranked near the top of my class, he said, "Pilot slots open up and close like doors in weather. Don't count on one to stay open just because you've got your foot in it." It wasn't wrong. It just wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I'd learned to be my own door. By the time I reached the T-38, Talon speed had a sound high, white, thin as piano wire. The Talon doesn't suffer fools or tourists. You fly it with your fingertips and all your attention. Formation work humbled me into a new species of careful. "To tighten it up," my flight lead would say, and the urge to please had to bow to the requirement to live. One afternoon in a turn, so smooth it felt like sliding on glass. I lost sight in the sun, glared for a breath, and felt my body go cold. "Knock it off." I called myself voice steady on the radio because radios don't care if you're rattled. We reset. We flew again. The debrief later was surgical. My lead circled my mistake on a whiteboard with the same pen he used to jot down praise. "You fixed it," he said. "That matters more than the miss." Somewhere in those months, a letter arrived from Mr. Grady on paper that had once been a grocery list. Bread oil cat litter, faint under the ink. "Keep your lift clean. A good landing is 100 small corrections you won't remember making. P.S. Eat real food." You can't outfly hunger. He knew what a body under pressure does. It lies about its needs until you teach it manners. Selection day felt like test results and weather forecasts and report cards all stapled together. The briefing room smelled like dry erase markers and adrenaline. The board read the names airframes bases. When they said my name and F-22 pipeline, the room tilted a degree. It wasn't shock. It was gravity shifting. I shook hands with classmates who'd grown into friends and with instructors who'd grown into the kind of stern uncles who pretend not to care and then do. That night, I took a victory lap at the base gym, empty, save for a janitor, humming along to a radio. I rode until the machine beeped, and the beep sounded like a runway centerline. Dad didn't congratulate so much as reposition. "Stealth demands restraint most people don't possess," he said. "You'll have to learn to be invisible." I thought of the years I'd trained in silence, underestimation, my constant wingman. "I've had practice," I said, and meant it kindly. Raptor School was its own country. The Sims were so honest you could smell your mistakes. The instructors had eyes like weather radar. They could see storms before you could name clouds. Tactics academics filled rooms with acronyms that braided into meaning only after the 5th or 15th repetition. BVR, EMSA. You train until the letters become sentences, the sentences become reflex, and reflex becomes judgment with a yoke attached. My call sign came on a night flight when the range went busy and the radios turned to soup. We were running a red air profile against younger eagles, good sticks hungry, and the plan asked us to be ghosts. Shape the fight, leave fingerprints, but not a face. I don't believe in luck. I believe in preparation meeting conditions. Still, when the AWACS controller said splash 3 unknowns picture clean, "Where the hell are you?" and my lead keyed up. "Right where you need us." Somebody on frequency laughed and said, "Can't paint her. She's a phantom." The name stuck because it fit. I didn't celebrate it. I put it in the same locker as every other label and went back to work. Weight and fitness never stopped being a conversation, mostly with myself. I learned what foods fueled clarity instead of fog. I learned to carry strength in places that mattered for flying core, like a bridge legs, like landing gear, neck like a spring. When a young lieutenant made a joke in the squadron bar about big girls in G-suits, I finished my water, looked him in the eyes and said, "You'll call me ma'am until you've earned otherwise, and you'll find the words you meant to use when you talk about teammates." He blushed the deep missionary red of a man newly converted to respect. The mission sets grew teeth, intercepts in weather that felt like moving through gauze, live fly exercises that braided Air Guard Navy and Marines into a net so tight even the holes had backup plans. In one multi-ship hop, a student lost SA and drifted wide near a refueling track. I slid in and spoke to him like I was reading him a bedtime story about survival. 2 degrees right? Good. Hands gentle. Breathe. You're fine. He was. We landed. He cried in the step van where no one could see. I didn't tell anyone. Some victories belong to the people who needed them most. I wish I could tell you there was a day when it all clicked and then never unclicked. The truth for those who've lived long enough to know better is that mastery is a tide. It comes in, it goes out. You keep the shoreline clean, so it has a good place to return to. When my evaluation said above average judgment under pressure, I smiled small and wrote the same note at the top of the next day's to-do list. Don't scare yourself. Don't scare your wingman. Don't scare the fuel. I flew my first operational sortie with gloves I'd broken into the shape of my hands and a checklist. My crew chief joked I could recite backward. On climb out, the town below looked like a circuit board. At altitude, it looked like a secret. Phantom 2. Push button 4. 2. Words like footsteps in a dark hallway you know by heart. Some nights after flying, I'd run the perimeter road until the fence lights stacked up like pearls in the dark. I carried my mother's last advice, finish your sentence, like a charm. I carried my father's skepticism like ankle weights. He wasn't wrong about standards. He was wrong about who could meet them. The difference between those ideas is a life. When the assignment sent me west for my first long deployment workup, Dad mailed a single card, a photograph of an F-4 on a tarmac older than I am. His handwriting across the sky, "Don't get sloppy." I pinned it above my desk, not as permission, as a reminder that the past doesn't get to be the only map. You draw your own charts and you check them against weather more often than pride prefers. By the time the squadron commander shook my hand and said, "You're ready," I knew what he meant. Not that I would never be afraid, but that I would never let fear take the controls. The long road had not made me thin. It had made me true. And truth flies straighter than vanity on every day that counts. They stationed me in the high desert where the wind teaches you to lean without bending. The base sat beyond a town with 2 stoplights and a diner that poured coffee like penance. We briefed at dawn, flew when the air was smooth enough to forgive ignorance, and debriefed until the sun bled out behind the hangars. After years of training, the name on my locker meant less than the names on the flight schedule. You earn tomorrow by respecting today. Deployments blur if you don't pin them to something ordinary. I remember a baby blue laundry bag that always came back a shade paler. A hardware store where the owner kept a jar of Tootsie Rolls by the register for pilots who looked like they forgot lunch. A church with a parking lot big enough for drill practice on Saturdays. Teenage guardsmen counting cadence while a farmer's market sold peaches 10 yards away. America is full of juxtapositions that work only because people decide they will. The mission sets range from air superiority exercises no one will ever read about to the kind of domestic assists that sneak into local news as 30 seconds of gratitude. During fire season, we ran coordination hops with guard helos and tanker crews, no weapons, just time on station math and shepherding. It was the summer 2 counties burned like old photographs. Smoke stacked over the hills in dirty sheets. A Huey lost power over a ridge after a bucket drop. The pilot managed to auto-rotate onto a slope that looked like it had been drawn by a hand that didn't care about mercy. The guard bird on scene radioed his location, and his fear-voiced tight words clipped. I've got a downed bird crew intact fire at our 12 winds variable. I was in a 2-ship orbiting a tanker track for a training profile. Our lead asked AWACS for tasking. Controller confirmed phantom flight check-in with guard rescue. We pushed throttles forward, covering distance like erasing a sentence. From altitude, the fire was a living thing with too many lungs. I talked to the helo pilot the way I'd learned to talk to panicked lieutenants and stubborn sergeants and once upon a time myself. We've got you on the map. Stay on that line of rock. Cruise inbound. We'll watch your wind. We weren't water. We weren't foam. We were eyes and radios and calm. Sometimes that's the difference. The rescue team found them, rode thermals like surfers, and winched 2 men off a slope that didn't believe in redemption. That night, my inbox held 3 messages. One from the helo pilot with a photo of his crew ash on their faces, smiles like relief. One from a county commissioner who called us angels and spelled my call sign with an F instead of a PH. And one from my father, a link to an article about a fuel mishap on another base subject line, sloppy breeds sadness. There's a joke in aviation. Every accomplishment buys you 5 minutes where you are forgiven for how human you are. After that, the clock resets. I printed the helo crew's photo and thumbtacked it inside my locker. Then I stapled a checklist to the door and reminded myself to earn the next 5 minutes. Weight lived with me like an opinionated ant. Not cruel, just persistent. Flight surgeons track numbers because numbers don't lie. People do, even with themselves. I found a rhythm strength in the morning before briefs food that fueled instead of fogged a blunt refusal to turn the mirror into a judge. The only scale that mattered sat under my wheels. If the jet didn't care about my dress size, why should a lieutenant in a bar? It wasn't always bar jokes. Sometimes it was the silence that follows a room where one woman arrives in a flight suit among men who think camouflage includes comments. I learned to shake hands in a way that discouraged smallness. I asked quiet questions and remembered names. I made sure the newest airman in the row knew where to stand and when to speak, because invisibility is a disease and leadership is a vaccine. Rumors about Peter traveled faster than postcards. He'd been accepted to a pipeline that opens 1 year and closes the next, buoyed people, whispered by a father with contacts and a smile built for golf courses. I didn't resent him. I resented the way the world confuses a head start with a destiny. When his training videos hit family group chats, Dad tagged them with captions like, "Next, hawk up." When my wing footage ran quietly across an internal briefing screen, no one at home saw the way my lead circled a maneuver and wrote elegant. Elegance doesn't trend. It just lands. The mission that changed my reputation in-house didn't look like a movie. No missiles, no music that swells, just weather and time. A civilian twin lost IFR in a winter system that closed around him like a fist. Thin ice on the wings, a pilot whose voice had climbed an octave into the range where men apologize for sounding afraid. We were returning from an airspace workup fuel. Comfortable crew chiefs already picturing chili in foam bowls. ATC asked for any military aircraft to establish visual and shepherd him to the Valley VOR. Phantom 2 will take him, my lead said. You've got the gas. He was a dot in soup, and then he was a shape. N578. I said, tone like a calm hallway. I'm your friend at your 10 o'clock. Don't chase me. I'll come to you. I pulled in until he could see me painted with strobes I rarely use. We're going to descend together 100 feet at a time. Keep your hands like you're holding a bird you don't want to scare. Good. Getting a little slow. Add a breath of power. Beautiful. They're clearing traffic below. I've got the valley. You've got me. We slid under the ceiling like ducking under a low doorway. The runway appeared at the end of a tunnel, God cut out of gray. You have the field, I said. Don't look at me anymore. Look at home. His wheels rolled. He sobbed once a sound, like the inside of a church after the choir leaves. I didn't key up for that. Dignity is a kind you offer when the world forgets how. Awards live quietly in binders. What sticks is a note taped to my locker the next morning in block letters from a crew chief who never attends banquets. You scared no one last night. Thank you. When I called Dad that weekend, he had already heard secondhand that some phantom nonsense made local TV fluff. I told him what mattered. 2 men off a slope, 1 pilot out of a cloud. He said altitude and angles. Nothing new under the sun. Try not to get reckless chasing headlines. We were speaking different dialects of the same language, his about control, mine about care. We hung up no angrier than before, which felt like progress in a way that doesn't show up on maps. Peter texted me a photo in a flight suit, sleeves rolled, because some boys think authenticity is a cuff. Check me out, sis, he wrote. Old man says I'm the one built for it. I typed and erased 3 replies. I settled on proud of your work. The sky is a teacher if you listen. He sent a thumbs up and a flexing bicep. Boys learn to perform strength before they understand it. You don't outgrow shadows. You choose how to walk in them. On a spring night that smelled like wet dust and JP8, my lead, slid a coin across the squadron bar, one of those challenge coins commanders carry, with a story welded to the metal. For judgment, he said. And for silence when the mic would have made you a hero. I tucked it into my pocket and felt its weight every time my father's old sentences tried to tug me off center. When the banquet invitation arrived, with its gold script and its promise of roast beef and recognition, I didn't expect a stage. I expected to clap for guard kids and retirees who'd built this town into something steady. I went to watch people applaud the right things. Instead, the right things found me and clapped back. So when Dad lifted the microphone and said what he said, it wasn't a surprise. It was weather I'd already flown. The surprise was the room. The surprise was a country I recognized, deciding in that moment not to mistake volume for truth. The master of ceremonies found his footing the way a man finds his glasses in the dark, careful, apologetic, aware that the room now saw more than the script had planned. He said into the mic, then steadied. We're honored tonight to have not 1, but 2 pilots in the Heir family. Laughter the kind that lets a crowd exhale without choosing sides. He looked at me. Major? He started, uncertain of my rank. Ma'am will do, I said to keep him from tripping on the truth he didn't know. Ma'am? He nodded, grateful for the rope. Would you like to say a word? I didn't want the mic. The mic is gravity to people who think falling and flying are cousins. But the room had changed assignment, and I was trained to accept tasking when it comes. I stood the chair legs whispering over polish and moved through the aisles like a person who knows where the exits are. Thank you, I said, quiet at first, and then clear. I came to clap for our guard kids and our retirees. If we're clapping for me, pass half of it to the crews who make my jet a thing I can trust. Pass the other half to the people at these tables who keep town stitched together while we're gone." A slow tide of applause rolled and settled. To my left, the retired sergeant who had said my call sign wiped at an eye like he was shooing a fly. Dad leaned into the mic, trying to retake airspace. "We're proud of Peter," he said, voice brisk with a commander's habit. He's going to be fine. I finished for him, saving him from the next sentence that might wound more than it proved. If he learns his checklists in the dark and remembers that the job is never to look impressive, but to keep people safe." I glanced at Peter. "You'll like the feeling, brother. Safety is heavier than trophies and sweeter than fame." Peter swallowed, cheeks flushed in a way that suggested both embarrassment and relief. He had been balancing on Dad's words all evening. I could see how tired that posture had made him. A woman in a navy blazer stepped closer to the stage. "If I may," she said, and the room, now hungry for truth, let her. "My name is Commander Lewis. Joint exercises last winter, this pilot." She nodded at me, ran red air, and made every young hotshot on our side eat humility for breakfast. It was magnificent and annoying and necessary. Laughter warm, grateful. This community should know the caliber sitting at table 9. It is a strange thing to be praised in front of people who used to clap when you lost. I let it pass over me like weather. You don't fly facing backward. From the back, a chair scraped. A man old enough to be my father's older brother stood, trim, sober suit shoes that had been polished by habit more than vanity. General Thomas R. Avery, Air National Guard, retired, he said, voice made of gravel and courtrooms. He did not take the mic. He didn't need it. My nephew was in a guard ship on that fire the other summer. I watched a video later of a radar track that looked like an angel refusing to leave. He turned to me, and God help me, he saluted. Not a sloppy civilian pantomime. A crisp, deliberate regulation salute from a man whose body hadn't forgotten. "Ma'am," he said simply, on behalf of a family that didn't become a headline that week. No one told the room to stand. They did it anyway in ones and twos until the tables arranged themselves into testimony. The applause came. Then not hungry, not showy, just a long, honest standing that made the floor feel steadier under my feet. I didn't blush. I didn't bow. I returned the general's salute not because I needed it, but because gratitude is a language best spoken without ornaments. Dad went pale. He had chased approval his whole life like a man racing a train to a crossing. To watch it arrive, uninvited, for the daughter he had just called hollow. There are words for that, and none of them are comfortable. He lowered the mic and stared at it, like it had betrayed him. The habit to command pressed against the fact of the room and found itself outnumbered. Peter looked at me with a boy's first glimpse of an adult truth that pedestals are as dangerous to those placed upon them as to those kept from them. He stepped toward me impulsively, then checked himself and stood instead at my shoulder, as if his body remembered formation from a life he hadn't earned yet. "Sit, please," I said, palms open. "Save your knees for people who don't get saluted when they go home." It got a laugh and a mercy seat of relieved sighs. The crowd settled. The general stayed standing until we matched eyes and nodded, two professionals acknowledging a job, not a myth. The MC, now safely back on script's thin ice, gestured to a slideshow of town kids in uniform. ROTC cadets grinned. Guard medics posed with a therapy dog. A mechanic held up a torque wrench like a violinist with a bow. America, the real one, lit the screen in small, ordinary miracles. As plates reappeared and conversations resumed, people came like weather again in gusts, then lulls. A lineman with forearms like fence posts said, "You talk that pilot out of a bad landing. I talk apprentices off poles in stormlight." Same voice. A school nurse pressed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for saying safety is sweeter than fame. I'm writing that on a sticky note for my office." Commander Lewis slipped me a card. "If you ever want to hop a sim at the base," she said, "I'll trade you an FA-18 syllabus for your debrief notes." We smiled the smile of women who had decided long ago to make rooms larger instead of smaller. My father didn't move. When the line of well-wishers thinned, I walked back to table 9 and sat without fanfare. He stared at the linen tablecloth as if it had recited a surprise line. The microphone lay on its side like a tool after a job gone sideways. "Dad," I said. He didn't look up. I didn't know he murmured which was true and not the truth. He hadn't wanted to know. There's a difference. "It's all right," I said, and meant that we would not litigate a lifetime among green beans. "Peter's good?" I added, because kindness isn't a finite resource unless you hoard it. He needs a mentor who will tell him when the story he's telling himself is louder than the checklist. Dad winced so slight I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching him my whole life. "You always were a better debriefer than a bragger," he said. It was as close to praise as his body could produce without shorting a wire. Peter leaned in. "Phantom," he said, shy, trying the name on like a jacket. Can I ask you about breathing under G's? I keep blacking a little at 6. "Of course," I said. "We'll practice the AGSM. We'll fix your legs and your timing. It's math your body can learn." He nodded, relieved. Boys hide better in swagger than in humility. It was good to watch him try the harder one. Across the room, General Avery signed a napkin for a kid who'd asked. When the boy ran off, the general approached our table. He put a coin down beside Dad's untouched dessert, his old unit's challenge coin edges worn by decades of pockets. "Colonel?" he said, offering respect not as a bribe, but as a reminder. A family with 2 pilots is a lucky one. Luckier still if both are trained to land. Dad's throat moved. He picked up the coin like it might be hot. General, he managed voice graveled down to honesty. "Thank you for your nephew story." "It isn't a story," Avery said. "It's a life I get to keep visiting." He inclined his head to me. "Ma'am." Then he was gone, a weather front that had done its work. The band struck up a slow standard. Couples rose to sway under cheap lights that made everyone look 20 years kinder. Commander Lewis danced with her wife. The lineman danced with the school nurse. The ROTC kid danced with his own future. I didn't dance. I sat with my brother and taught him to flex his calves and lock his breath on the beat that keeps the world from narrowing. Dad watched, hands folded as if he were a man at the edge of a runway, learning that the light he'd mocked wasn't a trick, it was a beacon. The mic never returned to his hand. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe it was training. Sometimes the safest thing you do is not re-enter a pattern you flew poorly the first time. When the tables cleared and the flags were carried out and the coffee urn breathed its last tired hiss, I walked into the cool night. The lake threw back 1,000 shards of borrowed starlight. Behind me, I heard Peter say to Dad, "She didn't make it about her." Dad didn't answer. The wind off the water answered for him, pressing his jacket to his frame, outlining the man he had been and the father he might still learn how to be. Outside, the night had the clean chill you only get in towns where the wind has room to run. The Legion's parking lot lights hummed like tired bees. People trickled out in pairs and clusters, carrying leftovers and foil and stories in their pockets. I stood by my truck and let the air strip the smell of coffee and speeches from my clothes. Peter found me first, hands jammed in his pockets, chin tucked inside his collar like a boy who has lost his place in a line he thought he owned. "You stole my night," he said, and it wasn't a yell. That was worse. It was a quiet accusation, shaped like a truth he hadn't stress-tested. "You took it." The standing. He gestured back at the building, at the space where a room had changed its mind. He was supposed to be proud of me. "I can't take what I didn't plan," I said. And I didn't plan any of that. I showed up to clap for the guard. The room did the rest. His mouth tightened. "You could have stepped back and left a retired general saluting the air. Left those people thinking it was okay to laugh at me because somebody told them to." I shook my head. Peter, standing up for yourself isn't stealing. It's refusing to sell something that wasn't for sale. He paced sneakers, scuffing lines into grit. "He said you were hollow," he whispered, like if he said it softer, it would change its weight. And then they made it like I'm the hollow one. "They didn't," I said. "They saw something you haven't had time to become yet. That isn't an insult. It's a to-do list." He stopped, shoulders slumped. Boys are taught to fight or fold. No one teaches them to stand. I wanted him to look at me the way he looked at He Swallowed. He doesn't look at anyone like that. He looks at the scoreboard, I said gently. Even when there isn't a game. That's his training, not your destiny. He pushed his fists deeper into his pockets, then pulled them out again like he touched something sharp. Will you help me? He asked. Not about the banquet, about the thing that mattered. With the G's? With the breathing. Yes, I said, because this was the easy part of love. Tomorrow. 0600. The gym with the ugly blue mats. He nodded, relief and shame fighting for space in his throat. Okay. He started to turn away, then back. I am proud of you, he said in a rush, like he was jumping from a low height before he could talk himself out of it. Even when I don't know how. Good, I said. That will get easier. He headed toward his car. Dad was a silhouette near the building coin in his hand, shoulders squared to no one. He didn't walk toward me. He didn't wave. He just stood like a man who had spent a lifetime holding a particular line and had discovered the ground beneath it was water. I drove to the diner because routines save people who fly and people who feel. The waitress with the beehive hairdo poured coffee without asking the cup heavy and chipped the kind that doesn't pretend to be more than it is. You looked like a storm front when you walked in, she said. We got pie for that. I'll take the kind that forgives poor decisions, I said. Pete, she decided, sliding a plate across with a fork that had probably outlived 3 owners, and a side of a stranger telling you you're okay. She wasn't a stranger. Not in the way that matters. She knew the squadron's training nights by how many burgers died before 9. She knew the guard drills by the boots that dirtied her floor in even rows. She knew the difference between men who came in alone because they liked quiet and men who came in alone because their kitchens held ghosts. You're okay? She said then, topped off the coffee. And your daddy will be okay or he won't, but that won't be your fault. I smiled without showing teeth. You should teach a class. Honey, this counter is the class. 2 regulars in feed caps argued a postgame they hadn't watched. A lineman unwound with a crossword. A high school couple split a grilled cheese and traded fries, 1 for 1 like a treaty. It is hard to stay dramatic in the presence of people who still need breakfast tomorrow. My phone buzzed. A text from Commander Lewis. If you want that sim trade, I meant it. Also, if the boy is smart, he'll let you coach him. If he isn't, we'll fix that first. I thumbed back a yes, and a thank you and the kind of smiley face that grown women are allowed to send other grown women when the world has been heavier than politeness. Another buzz. Mr. Grady. Late as always. Early where it counts. Lift still good? Watch your angle when family thermals kick up. I laughed into my coffee and wrote back, holding steady. The door clanged, and a handful of my crew chiefs shuffled in post-banquet and pre-sleep. They spotted me and didn't make a fuss, just slid into the booth across and stole a fry with the kind of theft you allow because it's part of the economy of affection. Ma'am, the oldest one said, nodding to my cup. You need a better kind of fuel. This is the octane that keeps my mouth shut, I said. Sometimes that's the safer option. You did fine, he said. I've watched you taxi through worse weather than men with microphones. We swapped small stories, their toddlers, my broken garbage disposal, the way the base gate guard had named the feral cat population like a roster. It grounded the night. When they left, one of them palmed a napkin onto the table. In block letters, don't let old maps tell you where the roads are. I found Peter at 0555, pale under fluorescent lights, legs jittery with the particular adrenaline reserved for mornings when the body remembers shame first and ambition second. He tried the AGSM like a man pretending to sing in church, too polite, not enough breath. I taught him the ugly version. Face like you're lifting a truck off a friend, I said. Lock. Breathe. Lock again. Don't be graceful. Be alive. He swore the good kind, the kind that means you're meeting your edges. We worked for an hour. He learned that strength is a conversation, not a pose. When we finished, he lay on the mat and stared at the ceiling like it was a sky he might earn. You'll be fine, I said. You're not hollow. You're green. He laughed once, shocked by his own relief. He'll still. He will, I said. He will be himself until he learns to be otherwise. Your job is to become the pilot who will be fine whether the clapping comes or not. We ate eggs at the diner after him demolishing protein like a man whose metabolism thought hope counted as calories. The waitress topped our coffees and judged our toast choices with the proprietary affection of a woman invested in everyone's cholesterol. Your daddy came through at 3 a.m., she said to me, casual as weather. Sat where you're sitting, ordered coffee, and stared at the sugar packets like they'd confess a crime. Didn't say much, left a tip like it was apology. That's new, I said, because it was. Men who don't have words use money, she said. It ain't the currency you need, but it spends. On base that afternoon, a maintenance briefing blurred into a SIM check, then into email, then into a quiet hour where I ran the perimeter road and counted fence posts, like rosary beads. My phone buzzed once and died. I ignored it. It buzzed again and didn't die. I checked. A number I recognized and didn't save call me. I didn't. Not because I wanted to punish a man for learning slowly, but because I have learned to choose the timing of my own conversations. I finished my run. I stretched until my hips stopped sounding like a screen door. I sat on the curb and let sweat run down the line of my jaw and drip onto concrete that had met worse. When I called, he answered on the first ring. I went to the diner, Dad said, as if reporting from a battlefield where pie is ammunition. The waitress told me I looked like I'd lost my dog. Did you? I asked. My voice sounded like the quiet between radar pings. I lost the script, he said. I didn't know there was another one. There always is, I said. It just doesn't hand itself to you. Silence stretched. It wasn't hostile. It was a man staring at a new map trying to decide if the scale was lying. I want to help Peter, he said finally, and I don't know how to do it without doing to him what I did to you. Start by listening, I said, and stop by bragging. We'll teach him the rest. I saw you with him, he said. In the gym. The breathing thing. Your mother used to say you could teach rocks to float if you had time. Rocks make terrible students, I said. He exhaled something like a laugh, something like a truce. Later that week, the base clinic called to ask if I could drive Dad to an appointment because he'd left my name on a form years ago and never took it off. He's fine, the nurse said quickly, hearing the way military kids hear codes in tone. Just needs someone to make sure he doesn't pretend he's invincible. Lifelong condition, I said. I'll be there. The appointment went like appointments go, blood pressure that told the story of a man who had commanded his body the way he'd commanded everyone else. Cholesterol built from decades of victory dinners and stubbornness. A doctor with a face arranged to be both firm and merciful. You're lucky, she said. Lucky is a word we use when discipline arrives right after denial. In the parking lot, he held the paper the way a man holds a citation and a pardon at the same time. I don't like being told what to do, he said. I know, I said, but sometimes the checklist isn't an insult. It's a version of love. He looked at me, eyes narrowing, as if trying to bring a distant runway into focus. I don't know how to be different. You don't have to know, I said. You have to practice. He nodded just once. It was more movement than we'd made in years. That night, I stood in my kitchen with the window open and the desert coming in like a hymn, dry, honest, blessedly plain. Revenge could have been the point. It would have been easy to end the story where the room stood and the general saluted. But rooms go quiet again. Salutes end. What lasts is the work after the gym at dawn, the coffee that forgives the phone calls, made when pride would rather hang up. I rinsed a plate, set it in the rack, and let the water run until it cleared the taste of banquet and the tang of microphones. Dignity, I've learned, is not a speech. It's a habit. You wear it daily until even the people who don't believe in it start to notice the fit. I picked Dad up for cardiac rehab on a Tuesday that smelled like rain, deciding whether to keep its promise. The hospital wing had posters that turned science into commandments. Move more. Eat colors. Breathe like you mean it. He bristled at the tone. Old commanders don't like being told what to do by laminated paper. A physical therapist in sneakers and patience met us with a clipboard. "Colonel Hale?" she asked. "Walter," he corrected quiet. She nodded, reading the weather. "Walter, then? We'll start with the bike. Low resistance. Think of it as taxi, not takeoff." He glanced at me as if to check whether pilot metaphors were allowed in civilian airspace. I shrugged. "Taxi it is." He climbed on knees stiff. The therapist clipped a pulse ox to his finger and set the cadence. "Breathe in for 4, out for 6. She looked at me. "You two can do it together." So we did two stubborn people learning the same rhythm from different lifetimes. In for 4, out for 6. It felt like a truce disguised as an exercise. On the 4th lap of the smallest track I had ever respected, he said, "You teach better than I command." "Maybe we're finally using the right verbs," I said. Afterward, we sat on a bench near a planter where someone had bullied petunias into blooming. He dug in his pocket and produced the coin General Avery had left him, edges worn smooth by a week of practice. He turned it with his thumb, an old ritual meeting, a new meaning. "I wanted you to be thin," he said, looking at the coin instead of me, because I thought thin meant disciplined and disciplined meant safe. I mistook categories for character. That's on me. It is, I said, because older ears deserve the dignity of accuracy. But I didn't need thin to be disciplined. I needed disciplined to be disciplined. He huffed a laugh that might one day learn to be a smile. "You always were better with nouns." We found a routine that didn't pretend to be reconciliation so much as rehearsal. His rehab. Tuesdays and Thursdays, my perimeter runs on the same mornings, our coffees after the waitress who ran the counter like a lighthouse, greeting us with a nod that meant, "Keep going." Peter joined when he could, cheeks color-high questions tumbling out of him in the productive kind of panic. We practiced AGSM in the corner by the vending machines. We practiced humility at the table with the chipped sugar caddy. Word of the banquet traveled the town the way weather does, changing picnics and plans, leaving behind more stories than facts. I heard versions that made me sound like a movie hero and versions that made me sound like a daughter angling for applause. None of them were true in full. The truth rarely fits in a headline. You have to live it sentence by sentence. On base, the squadron ran a family day with grills and bounce houses and tours through the hangars if the wind behaved. I invited Dad without ceremony. He came without uniform, a windbreaker, jeans, a cap that said nothing. When we reached the jet, he stood with his hands behind his back, the way trained bodies do when they don't know where to put them. A crew chief briefed a group of kids on why fingerprints and stealth coatings do not make friends. A mother asked if the plane was loud. "Only when it needs to be," I said, and the crew chief grinned like we'd rehearsed it. Dad circled the Raptor slowly, like a man visiting a cathedral he never loved, but finally respects. At the nose, he stopped. "I used to tell your mother the sky took too much from men," he said. "She would say the sky doesn't take, it asks. Men decide." "What do you think now?" I asked. He considered. "I think I decided poorly and deeply," he said, "and I'm deciding again." Peter wandered up with grease on his cheek from helping a crew chief adjust a ladder. "Did you ever get lost in a sim?" he asked me, an admission wrapped in a question. "All the time at first," I said. "The trick isn't never getting lost. It's not lying to yourself about it." He nodded, relief quick and guilty. Dad watched that nod like he was learning a new instrument by ear. "Son," he said, "voice. Even your sister can teach you everything I pretended I knew. Let her." The sun slid behind a cloud and came back out, a simple act that still feels like grace in certain company. We took a photo because people need evidence, even when their hearts remember better than their phones. I put the picture in a drawer instead of a frame. Not everything needs display. Some things need room. The call came 2 weeks later. A wildfire had jumped a road, eaten a hillside, and started courting a line of houses built by hope and mortgages. The guard was up, tankers and orbit crews, spread thin as butter on too much toast. We launched for airspace management and comms, those invisible jobs that make the visible ones possible. When we arrived, smoke had turned the valley into a world written in charcoal. I checked in with the helo teams. A voice I recognized answered, "Guard rescue, On station same pilot you babysat last season. We're smarter now. I smiled into the mask and didn't tell him I was smarter too. On the edge of the burn, a volunteer crew's truck slid off a gravel turn and came to rest at a bad angle, 2 firefighters hobbling out, one not moving. Helo crews maneuvered like saints with rotors. A gust stood up and tried to roll them. Hold, I said the way you say it to a horse and a man. You've got a pocket to your west. Slide. Good. Slide. Now down. They did. The hurt man went up on a line like a miracle practiced until it stops being surprising. When we landed, after the ramp smelled like smoke and rubber and the kind of relief that empties your pockets of bravado. A local news van idled at the fence line. The reporter wore hair that had fought the wind and lost. She wanted a quote. I gave her what towns deserve: coordination saves lives. This was a team effort. It was true and insufficient and exactly right for TV. Dad was waiting by my truck cap in his hands. He had watched from the public overlook where the town gathers to see if the sky will keep its promise. His face had that post-weather look people get when awe has overruled certainty. I saw you not make it about you, he said. It isn't, I said. I used to think legacy meant building a mirror big enough that I could see myself in everything that mattered, he said, threading the cap through his fingers. Turns out it's handing other people a window. He held out the coin General Avery had given him. I don't need metal to remember, he said. Keep it or give it to the boy when he earns it. Whatever you think is right. I'll hold it for a while, I said. Then we'll see. We drove to the diner because grief and joy both need coffee. The waitress set pie down without asking and slid an extra plate across the counter toward Dad. For the man who is learning, she said. He didn't argue. He ate. It tasted like something bigger than apology participation, maybe. Before we left, he cleared his throat. I said hollow into a microphone. He said plain as a weather report. I spoke a lie with confidence. I'm sorry. I didn't hug him. We're not that family yet. I put a fingertip on the table between us like I was tapping a checklist. Speak truth with discipline, I said. That's the job now. He nodded slow. He said, because old habits reach for the right word when they're ready. If you're listening and you're older than me or younger and tired in the same places, here's what I want you to take with you. When the episode ends, the scoreboard is a poor parent. Don't be one. Make your house a hangar where people and mistakes can land. Praise effort louder than image. Teach the people you love to breathe where the world narrows. And when you realize you've been flying with an old map, fold it. Draw a new one. You are allowed. If our story steadied your hands, share it with someone who needs steadier hands. If it reminded you of the person who stood for you when a room did not call them. If you want more stories where honor isn't a speech but a habit, stick with us. We'll keep telling them sentence by sentence until the sky looks like a place anyone can enter with work and a good checklist. The fork never reached my plate. I hid in the kitchen, too tired to answer my father's scorn. You're just a useless veteran, he spat toward the doorway so the whole table could hear. Then headlights washed the curtains. White 4 Hummers settled into Grandma's gravel like they knew the house by heart, and a SEAL team slipped through the side door, quiet, efficient, while a plainclothes officer lifted a phone that read, Urgent Orders, D.C. 3 hours earlier, I was staring at Amelia's letter, real stationery with raised floral corners, and her precise cursive dinner at Grandma's. Sunday, 6:0 p.m., family only. No heart, no smile, no mercy. Chesterville hadn't changed. Same gas pump that clicks off too soon, same brick church, same neighbors who wave before they remember why they stopped. I came anyway, in a plain sweater and quiet shoes that said nothing about what I carried. Training teaches you to be invisible when it counts. Grandma opened the door with a small gasp. Her hug was thinner now, her eyes still needle-sharp. Don't rise to it, sweetheart, she whispered. Lemon polish pot, roast the runner's old snag, everything smelled like before. Amelia had widened the aisle to the head chair and hung a chandelier that caught every breath. The seat at the top was hers, now not Grandma's. Family arrived in the old choreography Uncle Ray, bragging about 89 Aunt Maggie, balancing a casserole like an accusation, cousins pretending not to film. Dad stood with the ownership of a man who never asks for a chair. He looked me over like a used truck kicked the tire price it low move on. "Look who remembered the front door," he said. Not kindly. "Good to see you, Dad," I answered. "It costs less than arguing." Amelia, last of course, blazer badge at her hip bun that stung to look at. Chief of police fits her the way a spotlight fits a stage. She didn't hug me. She measured me. I let her. We sat. Grace was simple. Plates moved. I passed the rolls and complimented the potatoes because courtesies are armor. Dad started with the small cuts that pretend to be questions. "Do you have a real job?" Planning to stop running, and when I refused the bait, his voice rose, fishing for a jury. "You left this family," he told the table. "All those years playing soldier and nothing to show for it." I took a sip of water and watched the chandelier tremble from the furnace. "Eat while it's hot," I said to no one. Amelia tapped her fork. The room behaved like an audience. She stood deliberate. "Before we eat, I need to address something important." Grandma's knuckles went white. Amelia opened a red folder. Photos, tabs, glossy sleeves, props arranged like proof. "Some of you have asked what my sister actually does," she said. I looked into it. There are inconsistencies. Pause. There are lies. I didn't look at the photos. I counted exits, breaths angles. Silence is not surrender. It's assessment. Amelia Grandma said, voice cracking. "Not tonight." "Especially tonight," she said, and produced handcuffs with a neat flick metal, bright as coins. She came behind me and took my hands. The bracelets closed, click then a tighter click that said she wanted me to feel it. Dad exhaled like pressure left his spine. Finally, he said, "Pain is information." I breathed the way the corpsman taught us in, through the nose, out through the teeth. I've been hogtied in surf while instructors shouted the ocean didn't care. Steel on wrists is noise, not threat. Lillian Amelia said, savoring the name you're under arrest for impersonating. Movement in the corner window, a man walking a dog that didn't sniff. Wrong leash, slack, wrong pace. Not a neighbor. Placement, not coincidence. I pressed a hidden switch at my belt. One buzz smaller than a heartbeat and gone. Cousins leaned in. Aunt Maggie whispered, "Oh my." Grandma stared at folded hands like she could press the family together. Amelia loved a sermon. She talked timelines and sources and words she didn't understand enough to fear. Uncle Ray squinted at a page upside down. Dad soaked in the show as if the television had finally remembered him. "See," he told the room. "Pretending. Secrets and drama." I met his eyes. "Your roast is getting cold," I said. He mistook that for defiance. Let him. Convoys announced themselves in rhythm. Light pooled through lace. Gravel translated weight to every man at the table who has ever owned a truck. The house held its breath. Even Amelia paused on a hinge of a sentence. The side door creaked. I didn't stand. I did not spend a word. Boots took the kitchen tile like periods, not exclamation points. A plainclothes officer stepped into the doorway and held up a phone. "Urgent orders, DC." Another hand reached past and found the ratchet on my cuffs. The lock released with a soft, competent click. No apology. Real authority doesn't apologize for restoring order. Dad set his glass down hard enough to leave a ring on Grandma's linen. The chandelier didn't tremble. Neither did I. The air changed by a degree you feel only if you've trained for weather inside of rooms. I folded my hands and kept breathing. Only then did time slow back to normal. Here's the truth. I wasn't tired of my father. I was tired of the theater. I had no appetite to feed it. I've learned what silence can do, that speeches can't hold a perimeter. Buy minutes, keep oxygen where you'll need it. Tonight, I needed minutes more than mercy. The letter was bait, the folder, a script, the cuffs a prop. Amelia wanted an audience and a verdict. I wanted calm. When the boots crossed the threshold and the cuffs opened without fanfare, calm walked in with them. I didn't look at Amelia. I watched Grandma exhale. I listened to the heater cycle. I smelled the pot roast going dry. Ordinary details, because ordinary is what people forget when they're busy mistaking noise for truth. That's all part one needs to be the moment the noise gets quiet enough to hear what's real. The rest was already on its way. I used to think silence was a flaw they forgot to sand off me in BUDS. You learn to shut up in the surf when cold slices your bones into tiny bright pieces and the instructors pace the shoreline like metronomes of doubt. You don't plead with the Pacific. You measure it. Count waves. Count breaths. Count the seconds between when someone starts to panic and when they decide not to. The ocean and family have that in common. Both drown you if you argue with them the wrong way. We were class 2-7-something. Numbers matter. They make you real. Day 3. I watched a man twice my size hand his helmet to the bell with both hands, like he wanted it to take the memory from him. I didn't judge. You never judge out there. You just keep your grip and your count and your reasons. Mine were small and sharp. Grandma's laugh when she beat me at cribbage, the way Virginia summer hangs in your lungs. My sister's eyes the day I shipped out, and she didn't look up. Reasons are anchors. You tie them tight, and you don't tell anyone what they are. Drown-proofing isn't meant to break you. It's meant to teach you what breaks you. Wrists bound, ankles tied, bobbing on command, you learn that water doesn't hate you. It simply doesn't notice. I swallowed enough salt to season every pot roast Grandma ever made, and when the world finally stopped spinning, a corpsman handed me a towel and said, "You breathe like a watch." I took it as a compliment. He meant I was precise, even when I shook. That stayed. The first scar that mattered wasn't the one you could see. It was the phone call after Hell Week when my voice was new and raw and the payphone tasted like copper. Mom picked up on the second ring and said I sounded far away. That's the point, I joked. Silence. Then her careful sentences about Amelia covering bills, Amelia driving Grandma to appointments, Amelia talking to the pastor, Amelia making chicken salad for the funeral committee at church like a dutiful headline. I said I was proud of her. It came out simpler than I felt. "Come home for Thanksgiving," Mom said. "If the Navy lets me," I said, and we both pretended the pause after wasn't grief. Dad didn't call. He preferred statements you could frame on the wall. When I did see him, he'd say, "Military's fine when you're 22. What's the plan when it stops clapping?" The plan was always the same: do the job so well, no one needs to clap. SEAL work is small problems solved fast. People think it's all explosions and headlines. Mostly it's lists, gear checks at 0400, lining up edges on maps with the same reverence other people save for hymns. A torn thumbnail you tape and forget. The constant minor ache of preparation, the way a house hums when the air conditioner kicks on. Quiet competence doesn't photograph well, so you learn to live without pictures. And you learn, if you're smart, that the loudest person at the table is usually the least certain. The last deployment I can name out loud teaches the same lesson in a new dialect. Desert, not ocean. Heat, not cold. Night vision green, making everything look like the world is about to remember you wrong. I carried a pack that made my shoulders feel like borrowed equipment. I slept in bursts, 20 minutes on a rooftop, 8 minutes in a stairwell, 9 minutes behind a berm, while a lieutenant whispered coordinates into a handset like a prayer. When we rotated stateside, I slept through 3 alarms and still woke up tired. That's when Dr. Grant wrote fatigue in a notebook and asked if I jumped when a door slammed. "Only if a drone comes through it," I said, and he smiled like that was proof I was still reachable. People at home aim their love like flashlights, always searching for something to reveal. Amelia's love, if that's what you call it, came with checklists. She liked that I was decorated. She didn't like that I wouldn't decorate her story with details. "You act like secrets make you special," she told me once over coffee. I didn't finish. "They make me safe," I said. She rolled her eyes the way she used to when I beat her to the mailbox. "You left," she said. "You stayed," I said. We both said, "You chose without saying it." I learned early that if you give some people 3 sentences, they'll build a gallows with them. The trick is giving 2. When her letter came, the raised floral corners pretending to be tender, I tried to ignore it. Then I put it in my pocket like a stone and felt its corners all day. The bass sounded the same, forklifts, distant rotors, the metallic thud of work getting done, but the letter changed the pitch of everything. I filed for leave like someone who trusts systems because she's helped build them. OSDI pinged back the expected approvals in the expected order checkboxes you can feel, even when you don't see them. I didn't take a dress uniform. I didn't take medals. The one civilian outfit I packed was deliberately plain the way a blank page is honest. On the bus into town, the driver kept glancing in the rear view like he recognized a story he couldn't place. Chesterville looks smaller, the way places shrink when you finally grow into your bones. The gas station still had the sign that promised cheap coffee and delivered it. The church still believed gossip was fellowship if you tied a casserole to it. Grandma's porch still needed paint near the railing where we used to tie a jump rope and call it training. "Don't rise to it," she whispered when she opened the door, and I didn't ask how she knew what it was. She always knew the temperature of the room before stepping into it. Inside the house, held its old chorus lemon polish pot, roast the faint ghost of my grandfather's aftershave from a drawer no one opens. Amelia's touches announced themselves like she was afraid someone might miss them, a chandelier that threw light like confetti, a framed certificate near the kitchen that said, "Authority," even when no one was reading. Dad took up space with that proprietary lean he favors, the one that says, "This living room owes him rent." He assessed me like a contractor pricing drywall he doesn't want to install. "You look fine," he said, finding the cheapest compliment and handing it over like a receipt. "Thanks," I said, because I'm generous when I can be. What I didn't tell anyone, not Grandma, not Mom, not the mirror, was that I'd already felt the dragline snagging. Piper, one of ours, who talks in footnotes because she never forgets a qualifier, had messaged me 2 days prior. "Unlicensed inquiry, flagged near you, possible PI touching federal fences." People like Amelia think private investigator means a man in a hat with a camera and ethics. It often means someone who believes a lock is just an opinion. Piper advised awareness, not action. "We're watching," she sent. That was enough. So I showed up and did not announce myself. I poured water. I passed rolls. I let Dad expend his inventory of barbed remarks. When he said useless veteran, I filed it under predictable and finished my sip. When Amelia opened her folder, I cataloged the TELS exhibits printed on a home office printer chain of custody that would embarrass a rookie, photos taken at angles that make innocent things look like proof. She talked about stolen valor, like she'd said the words in a mirror to see how righteous her mouth looked making them. I didn't interrupt. Why offer her a better line? What I did do was notice the dog walker. Without a dog who'd been circling the block too long. The leash hung wrong. The man's shoes were wrong for the sidewalk. And when he pretended to pick up what nothing left, he did it in the sightline of someone who's trained to read the geometry of a scene. Every bad play uses the same props. The signal at my belt is not dramatic. It's a whisper passing into a system that was built to catch whispers. It says, someone who shouldn't is making a mess. It asks, "Do you see me?" And if the right eyes answer, the next moves are quiet. You never send a parade to fix a lock someone shouldn't have picked. I sat still and counted. 13 breaths. The furnace hummed. Amelia's voice pitched higher when she felt the room coming with her. Dad enjoyed his front row seat. Mom arranged her napkin like an apology she couldn't fold right. Grandma prayed with her hands. The cousins watched like subscribers, waiting for a bell to ring. When the side door creaked and the phone with urgent orders DC appeared, my heart didn't leap. It settled. There's a difference. Settling is when the world finally matches what you prepared for. Settling is when the noise obeys the math. Settling is when the ocean doesn't notice you, but you notice yourself, and that's enough. I keep being accused of secrets like they're a crime. They're not. Misuse is. Negligence is. Vanity is. Secrets are tools. You learn which ones to carry and which ones to leave in the case. Tonight, I carried silence. It fit in my pocket, next to a letter with floral corners, and felt heavier the way truth does when you've stopped asking it to convince anyone. I didn't come for revenge. I came to see if my quiet could still hold under a roof that once made me loud. The answer was waiting in the hallway in plain clothes, holding a phone no one could argue with. I kept counting, because counting is how I tell time when clocks are lying. The next part was inevitable. Grandma always started Sundays with the radio low old hymns farm reports, the weather read by someone who remembered your father's name. Amelia had changed the station to some breathy jazz that sounded like a lobby. It fit the chandelier. It didn't fit Grandma. I stood at the sink with her while we waited for the roast to rest. She pressed a palm to my cheek like temperature could tell her everything the last 10 years wouldn't. "Don't rise to it," she said again, softer like a password. "I know," I said. I brought my quiet. She nodded, once approving the gear I couldn't show. From the kitchen doorway, I could see the living room filling itself like an old photograph developing. Uncle Ray telling the same football story he's told since '89, every retelling adds a yard. Aunt Maggie whispering with the volume of someone who never learned the difference between concern and entertainment. Cousin Jenna pretending not to film anyone while filming everyone. The small-town choreography is dependable coats on the stair rail men, standing not because there aren't chairs, but because standing looks like leadership kids sent to the den with a carton of chocolate milk and an iPad. Mom arrived last of the non-Amelia set, hair done lipstick, perfect eyes calculating. She hugged Grandma and put a hand on my shoulder that didn't commit to which daughter it was touching. "You look tired," she said. Which is how people say, "I don't know how to talk to you anymore," without confessing they don't. "I slept on a bus," I said. It was close enough to true. Amelia made her entrance the way a stage manager cues a light at the edge of conversation, so everyone has to turn to catch up. Navy blazer pressed slacks badge on her hip like punctuation hair in a bun that apologized to no one. She kissed Grandma's cheek, shook Uncle Ray's hand like he was applying for something, and skipped me altogether with precision that read as professionalism to anyone who didn't know the language. Chief, someone said, impressed by their own proximity to the idea of order. "Thank you for coming," she answered, eyes never losing the room. She had the head chair set with a fresh runner, new silver, a small arrangement of white lilies like a wreath scaled for a plate. Grandma's chair, her old place at the head, had been nudged down the side. It looked like an accident. It wasn't. People who move chairs for a living know the power in 6 inches. We took our places. Grace was said by Uncle Ray, who managed to make gratitude about ham and football. Plates moved the way they always do, clockwise, steady, generous. I poured water, passed the rolls, complimented potatoes that didn't need flattery. Courtesies are ballast. You keep a table from listing by weighting it with simple things. Dad waited until there was enough cutlery on porcelain to score his monologue. He doesn't speak into silence. He prefers to interrupt. So he said, drawing the vowel like it owed rent. "You're back." "For dinner," I said. "Back is back," he said, and smiled at the people who'd agree out of fear of disagreeing. "How long this time? A day? A week? Until the next? What do you call it?" He twirled a fork like a baton. "Operation." "Work," I said. "We call it work." "Work." He parroted, satisfied he'd made my vocabulary smaller. "You left your mother and your sister to hold the line, and you call it work." Mom watched her green beans like they might confess something. Grandma's napkin straightened itself under her left hand. "I made arrangements," I said. "We all did what we thought best." "What you thought best was disappearing," he said. He loved the word disappearing. It made him the one who stayed. "And for what? You come home with no husband, no children, no... I don't see anything on your lapel. Not even one of those little ribbons you people wear. You got all that training and nothing to show. There are more generous ways to say you miss your daughter. He doesn't prefer them." "I'm here," I said. "And that's supposed to be enough," he said and laughed like he'd told a clean joke. "Eat while it's hot," Grandma said, the closest she comes to a command. Amelia lifted her water glass and tapped its rim with her fork, 2 polite chimes that sounded like a gavel to anyone listening for one. Conversation thinned, phones found pockets. The radio jazz apologized its way into silence. "Before we eat," She began voice calibrated to the room as if she'd practiced over the hum of the dishwasher. I need to address something important. Grandma's hand tightened on her napkin. Mom sat straighter, throat working. Uncle Ray's eyebrows found ambition. Aunt Maggie gave a tiny gasp designed to be heard. I kept my eyes on my plate and counted breaths. Calm is a system. You start it when the lights change. As chief, a lot crosses my desk, Amelia said. Casual, rehearsed. Sometimes it concerns this town. Sometimes it concerns this family. She didn't look at me. Looking is a gift. Some of you have asked me what exactly my sister does, where she goes, what she brings back. She smiled the way you do when you're about to use the word transparency like a weapon. I decided to find out. She produced a red folder from her bag and set it at the empty space by her plate like she'd saved a seat for it. Plastic sleeves, color tabs, dividers, performative organization. She opened it with 2 fingers, letting the hinge creak a sound chosen for effect. I obtained documents through a private source, she said. Applications, records, photos. There are discrepancies. There are falsehoods. She paused to let the words bloom into whatever flower each listener feared. Uncle Ray leaned over to squint at a page upside down. Aunt Maggie sucked a breath like a straw. Cousin Jenna pretended not to angle her camera. Dad folded his arms and rocked back, pleased to be present for revelation. Amelia, Grandma said, not loud, very sharp. It's time, Gran, Amelia said, and lifted the first sheet between thumb and forefinger like a teacher calling a name at roll. This is a federal form, an application for military identification credentials submitted under the name Lillian Caldwell with a DD-214 that does not match public record, a deployment history that cannot be verified through accessible channels, and pay stubs that do not align with known scales. Public record, accessible channels, known scales. Words that sound official when you don't know the locks they don't open. Where did you get that, Mom asked, almost whisper. A source, Amelia said. Legitimate. Licensed, I asked, mild. She didn't answer. She lifted a photo, instead a grainy shot of a storage crate with barcodes any warehouse would recognize if it knew how to read. This was found in a private property rented under her name. She tapped the crate. Classified materials, seals. She has no right to any of it. I didn't look at the photo. I watched the window across the street. A man pretending to walk a dog paused again, leash slack where a dog would tug. His shoes were wrong for the sidewalk, wrong weight distribution, wrong kind of looking. Every bad plan hires the same props. I'm not doing this to embarrass anyone. Amelia said a sentence that only appears before someone does. I'm doing this to protect our family and our community. Dad said, finally, like it was dessert. Lillian, Amelia said, turning to me with all the ceremony she could cram into my skin, I'm placing you under arrest for impersonating a federal officer, fraud, and unlawful possession of government property. No one breathed. That's not true. We all breathed. We just tried not to be heard doing it. Turn around, she said. Amelia, Grandma said again, standing now, napkin still folded, the posture of a woman who has broken bread across decades and does not tolerate it being used as a prop. Not here. This is official, Amelia said. I won't let her make a fool of you. I stood slowly, not because she'd asked, because I don't let anyone put hands on me while I'm sitting if I can help it. Standing levels the field. It also lets you see the room. Uncle Ray's mouth was open, like he'd forgotten what to do with it. Aunt Maggie's eyes were glossy with a thrill she called concern until someone asked her to prove it. Mom stared at the lilies like they might tell the truth. Amelia came behind me, metal-brushed skin, cool then not. The first cuff closed with a polite click. The second took effort and intention. She tightened until my fingers tingled, then gave it one more squeeze like a signature. Pain is a language. I am literate. I cataloged the pressure points, the angle, the way she stood on the balls of her feet to use an extra inch of height like a weapon. I breathed like a watch. Photos. Aunt Maggie asked the room in a whisper too loud to be accidental. Don't, Grandma said a single syllable with the weight of a gavel. Dad exhaled satisfied air, the sound a man makes when a refrigerator finally stops humming. Maybe now, he said to everyone, and no one shall stop pretending. I didn't turn. I didn't give them my face. Faces invite translation. I kept my eyes on the window where the man with the leash bent to pick up nothing and bag it. He left the bag tied to a fence wrong. People who clean up after dogs don't display it. People who pretend do. I pressed my hip back a hair's breadth enough to feel the hidden switch beneath my belt press into bone. If you looked closely, you might have thought I was adjusting for comfort. I was. I pressed once. The vibration answered. One small confirmation that the system designed to notice quiet had noticed. Amelia lifted her chin to address the room, letting the cuffs glint under the chandelier like pearls like proof. Some of you will think this is extreme, she said, pacing behind my chair like a TED Talk in a town with only one stoplight. But you haven't seen what I've seen. You haven't found what I've found. You haven't connected the dots I connected. Dots are dangerous. People connect them into pictures that suit their pastime. I counted seconds. 11, 12, 13. Calm has a rhythm if you practice it enough. No one at the table asked the right questions. Chain of custody, jurisdiction, authorization scope. They asked the wrong ones with their eyes. Is this happening? Are we allowed to enjoy it? What will the neighbors say? The neighbors always say something. The neighbor across the street was already part of this show. Transport will arrive in the morning, Amelia announced like logistics were her private choir. We'll let everyone eat first. I'm not cruel. She believed it. The radio found its signal again, and then lost it a hiss that sounded like the room thinking. The furnace kicked on. The lilies made the air too sweet. My wrists burned and then stopped burning the way hands do when they decide you don't deserve them. I flexed each finger in turn to let the nerves know I was still in charge of them. The side door to the kitchen creaked just a thread of sound. Not dramatic. True things rarely are at first. The creak was small enough to be a draft, but drafts don't move like that. Measured, deliberate, not wanting to be heard, but not needing to hide. Amelia didn't notice. She was busy arranging her face into the expression of someone about to be thanked for saving a town. My wrists burned beneath the cuffs, then went numb, the body's way of budgeting sensation. I breathed in fours, the way the corpsman taught us. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold, until the heat in my hands stopped trying to be the story. Some of you will say this is family business, Amelia said, pacing behind my chair like the hardwood was a stage she'd paid for. It isn't. It's criminal. It's fraud. It's stolen valor. She liked the way those words felt in her mouth. They were big enough to make a chandelier look like a spotlight. Stolen valor. Uncle Ray echoed, grateful for a term that let him be on a team. Exactly, Amelia said, and tapped the red folder with 2 fingers like she was swearing it in. You don't get to wrap yourself in uniforms and medals you didn't earn. I thought about the day my class got pinned, sand still in our hair, salt still in our teeth, bodies held together by tape and will. I thought about writing home without actually writing, how sometimes you mail a silence because anything else would be bragging or burden. I didn't think about medals. Medals are for ceremonies. You can't strap them on a team and go under with weight that matters. Aunt Maggie raised her phone just enough to catch the cuffs in frame. For records, she told the Heir a woman who believes documentation equals dignity. Grandma didn't look at her. She put her palm flat on the table as if steadying old wood. Where is this coming from? Mom asked, voice thin, like she wasn't sure if she was asking Amelia or the room or the past. Who told you to do this? My office, Amelia said without blinking. My duty. Duty to who I asked, mild enough to be mistaken for polite. To the truth, she said, and took 2 steps to my left so the lilies and the cuffs could share a frame. I've seen breachers take less care setting charges. Pain is a language. Endurance is a translation. The cuffs bit bone at points I could map with my eyes closed, the place where hand becomes wrist, the tendon that tries to lift a finger despite circumstance. The numb came back in waves, the way surf reminds you it owns the argument. I adjusted my stance by 1/2 inch, enough to give the nerves a vote, not enough to telegraph intent. But teaches you to suffer without spectacle. Your suffering isn't the mission. Dad leaned back, arms folded, satisfied to be the man who always knew. You can't run from facts, he announced to the table, as if facts had volunteered to be drafted into a family drama. Your sister did the hard work nobody wants to do. The kind that requires a locksmith, I said. He didn't hear me. Or he pretended not to. Across the street, the dog walker without a dog had disappeared. That meant one of two things. Either the show was over, or the show had moved seats. I counted seconds the way I used to count the last 10 meters to a door that didn't want to open slow enough to be true, quick enough to be useful. The furnace hummed, the chandelier clicked as its filaments cooled to what the room could afford. My heart didn't race. It waited the way good hearts do under orders. Transport is arranged. Amelia continued scrolling her phone with the confidence of someone who believes replies arrive because she asked for them. Morning process. I considered tonight, but, well, we're family. We'll finish our meal. She believed that was mercy. She believed cuffing someone at Grandma's table was professional if you let the roast stay warm. Do you have jurisdiction? Grandma asked, not meaning to say the word, accidentally revealing the reading she did when the house was quiet. Amelia smiled without teeth. Chiefs don't ask for permission to do their jobs. Sometimes they do, I said. You don't get to define my job, Amelia snapped. And there it was. The crack in the voice training can't stand. She recovered quickly enough to fool everyone who wanted to be fooled. Everyone at that table wanted to be fooled. It was easier than being wrong. The side door sighed again, a hinge remembering it had a part. A draft would have tickled candles. This stirred attention. No one looked up except Grandma, who glanced toward the kitchen, the way women who raised families learn to register a pot boiling dry before it screams. Keep eating, Amelia said, and no one moved a fork. In a capture exercise years ago, they zip-tied us to a chair and piped in bad radio until the brain begged to confess purchases we hadn't made. The only useful lesson was this: you can own a moment by refusing to perform it. You can sit with your shoulders square and your jaw relaxed and your gaze soft. And you can let the people who need theater exhaust themselves while you can serve. I set my weight on the balls of my feet, breathed through the old pain, and let the room overshare. Cousin Jenna's camera found my cuffs panned to Amelia's badge returned to Grandma's hands. Hands tell truth at a volume mouths can't. Grandma's were steady now. That steadied me. You know, Lily and Dad said like we were at a barbecue and he was about to explain how to marinade. If you'd been honest, from the start, your sister wouldn't have had to go this far. Honest, how I asked? About what you really do, he said. Where you go, who you think you are. I let the question settle into the runner between the plates where gravy had already made a geography. Who you think you are has never been a question solved by speeches. It's solved by presence. Turn her around. Amelia told no one in particular, the tone of someone who expects compliance without looking to check for it. She reached for my shoulder to pivot me and met a certain kind of stillness. Not resistance, stillness. They train you for that moment too, the difference between being moved and choosing your placement. She adjusted her grip and made it happen. It mattered to her that the cuffs were visible when she turned back to the audience. Some of you will see this as humiliating, she said. It is. It's supposed to be. Consequences are instructive. The radio cut back in with a whisper of weather temperatures falling, overnight chance of frost north of the county line. I smiled because forecasts still dare to be confident about what comes next. Any last words, Amelia asked, and the room performed a collective inhale, the kind people make when they expect a commercial to end. Eat, I said. Cousin Ray's fork scraped porcelain and then fell silent. Aunt Maggie's phone lowered 2 inches. Mom's eyes flicked to mine, and away a small apology dressed as caution. Dad shook his head like he'd predicted this lack of cooperation and was tired of being right. Fine, Amelia said, and reached for the folder again. Then we'll proceed. The side door didn't creak this time. It breathed. Plain shoes on tile sounded like punctuation, not plot. The kind of person who can stand in a doorway and let the room decide whether to see them. The kind of presence that doesn't audition. Chief Caldwell, a calm voice said from the kitchen threshold, polite like a pronounced period. We need you to disarm. Amelia didn't turn immediately. She arranged her shoulders first, then pivoted like she was granting access to a scene. Who are... Please disarm, the voice repeated, same tone, same volume, the way people speak when the outcome has already been scheduled. Right hip. Set it on the table. Dad straightened. Uncle Ray muttered, "What the?" and forgot the rest. Aunt Maggie's phone froze between curiosity and self-preservation. Amelia's hand hovered over her holster. She opted for her badge instead, lifting it like a cross. "This is my house," she said, which is untrue, but sounded like a principle. "This is my jurisdiction." Disarm, the voice said again, not louder, closer. There's a point in any operation when everyone in the room feels the map redraw itself, even if they can't name the cartographer. This was that point. The cuffs cut my wrists, but they didn't cut into me. The humiliation tried to be the headline and failed. I stood in it, the way you stand in surf knees. Bent, weight-low eyes on the horizon you know better than to trust. I looked at my father. He looked back with the full force of a man who has never had to revise a sentence in public. His eyes were hard, certain relieved to see me lowered to the size of his disappointment. He believed Amelia. He believed the folder. He believed the cuffs were character. He believed this would finally end the bother of me. Some people require humiliation to feel safe. Others endure it because they know it's a weather system, loud, temporary, entirely uninterested in who you are when it passes. Now the voice said, as soft as a Sunday prayer. The command in that voice made even the chandelier obey. Amelia's hand hovered, then twitched toward her badge again, like it could rewrite the rules of gravity. The person in the doorway stepped in plainclothes neutral posture, the kind of presence you recognize, not from television, but from rooms where decisions cost paperwork and sleep. Chief Caldwell, she repeated closer now. Right hip, weapon on the table, slowly. Amelia's eyes flicked to Mom for backup that couldn't be notarized to Dad for applause. He couldn't deliver to Grandma for absolution that wasn't on the menu. Then she unholstered, cleared the chamber with a movement that would have passed a training video, and set the pistol beside the lilies. The table, suddenly honest, didn't sag. Thank you, the woman said, hands visible. What agency? Amelia demanded. NCIS, she said, and lifted a finger just enough for a second shape to appear. Another, plainclothes male, no theater, holding a small black device that hummed authority. He stepped behind me with the courtesy of a surgeon and tapped the ratchet on my cuffs. The lock surrendered with a click that sounded like a room exhaling. I didn't rub my wrists. You don't negotiate with pain in public. I flexed once, catalog sensation returning, and set my hands on the chair back where everyone could see them do nothing threatening. Dad stared at the weapon on the table like it had betrayed him personally. Aunt Maggie lowered her phone without remembering to hide it. Uncle Ray sat down for the first time that evening, as if his knees had been holding a truth up and were finally allowed to rest. Ma'am, the male agent said, addressing Grandma with more respect than anyone had offered her all night, we'd like everyone to remain seated. Then speak plain, Grandma answered. We're not deaf. The woman, Agent Rollins, if I had to guess from the way she owned her vowels, nodded once. There's an ongoing federal matter that intersects with what's occurring here. We're here to prevent further interference and ensure everyone's safety. Interference, Amelia found her footing in the word like it was a curb she could stand on. I'm the chief of police. I don't interfere. I enforce. Rollins's glance touched the red folder like a gavel. You've introduced unvetted material into a civilian setting and detained a federal officer outside your jurisdiction. That qualifies. Mom's fork chimed the plate she hadn't touched. Federal officer, she whispered as if the room might fine her for volume. Who are you talking about? Dad said, already knowing the answer he didn't want. Rollins didn't point. She didn't need to. She turned half a degree toward me, the way ships adjust course without making a speech. Ma'am, are you hurt? No, I said. Do you need medical attention? No. Understood. The male agent moved the cuffs from the table to a pouch with a practiced efficiency that turned metal back into objects. He did not look at Amelia. That seemed to bother her more than being looked at. "This is ridiculous," Amelia said, and reached for her badge again as if repetition could reverse procedure. "If she's federal, why isn't she?" The front door opened without knocking. Not rude, necessary. The air shifted as measured steps crossed Grandma's threshold boots that were not a performance, but a vocabulary. Conversations like this borrow rooms. They also return them. He wasn't in dress blues. He was in command. Where you don't see on parade fields, dark jacket, quiet insignia. Everything tailored to move and stop moving exactly when he chose. Gray at the temples, not because time had won, but because he'd promoted into it. The kind of man who has spent more of his life standing at tables like this than at tables with wine glasses. "Admiral on deck," the male agent said, not loudly and not for show. Everyone stood reflexively except me and Grandma. Old habits, old courtesies, old knowledge that hierarchy is simply how you keep planes from colliding. He scanned the room once the way you clock exits, faces, weapons, and history in a single sweep. His gaze found my hands, then my eyes. He nodded, not small and not big. Precisely the size of respect owed and offered. "I stood because you stand for what's earned." He raised his right hand. I returned it. The salute lasted exactly as long as doctrine requires and memory demands. "Rear Admiral Caldwell," he said, voice steady as a pier. "We're squared away here." "All clear, sir," I answered. The sound that moved through the room wasn't a gasp. It was calibration, every person silently adjusting their memory of me against the shape of a single fact. Rear Admiral. Not a rumor, not a boast. A rank wearing my name like a uniform wears a body exact. Amelia made a noise that wanted to be a sentence. Who did you? The Admiral's eyes touched her like a bright winter. "Chief Caldwell, I'm Marcus Delaney. You've initiated an action that now intersects with Department of the Navy equities and active naval special warfare operations. We'll need your cooperation." "Equities," Uncle Ray repeated valiantly, trying to keep up. "Interests," Rollins translated merciful. Delaney turned to Rollins. "Weapons secured." "Yes, sir." "Material recovered and logged." He faced the table, not seeking their approval and not fearing their witness. "Ladies and gentlemen, certain items referenced in that folder are part of an ongoing classified transfer under Navy custody. Their chain of custody is federal, not municipal. Displaying, distributing, or detaining based on leaked images is not only inappropriate, it's unlawful." "Leaked," Amelia said, as if her mouth had to test the word before her brain would accept it. I had a source. An unlicensed investigator who misrepresented himself to gain access to a property and manipulated a manual override on a secured container. Rollins said, "No judgment, only facts. We have the messages." Amelia looked at Mom, then at the lilies, then at nothing. People talk about color draining from a face. It doesn't drain. It shuts off like a light in a room you thought you owned. Rear Admiral Dad attempted, full of the courage of a man who has hosted 3 barbecues. "If she's who you say she is, why all the secrecy? We're her family." Delaney gave him the same respect he gave the door, because need to know is not sentimental. Grandma coughed a laugh she didn't intend. The Admiral almost smiled. Almost. "Chief Caldwell," he resumed, "you will remain available for statements. Your service weapon stays logged with NCIS pending review. You are not to contact outside parties regarding this matter." "I was protecting my family." Amelia said the sentence, a raft that looked smaller now that the ocean had an audience. "You were performing a story," Delaney said, even not unkind. "Protection is quieter." The chandelier stopped pretending to shine. It simply lit the room. Mom's hands found each other and decided to be still. Aunt Maggie put her phone face down, like that might atone for its appetite. Cousin Jenna blinked hard as if her eyes wanted to edit. Dad's gaze came to me, snagged, tried to reconcile the daughter he'd sized and priced with the officer who'd just been saluted in his dining room. He reached for certainty and found the edge of a napkin. "Admiral," I said, not looking away from my father, because sometimes mercy looks like holding a gaze, "may I request that any statements be taken here quietly, and that my family not be removed from the residence tonight?" "Granted," he said immediately. "That's what rank buys you when you've earned it, assumption of good judgment." Rollins slid a slim folder from her bag and set it on the table like a coaster for the truth. "These are acknowledgement forms. We'll collect signatures and leave copies. Please avoid social media commentary until you're contacted." "Social media," Grandma repeated like it might be a brand of margarine. "We'll make it simple, ma'am," Rollins promised. Delaney faced me again without ceremony. "You all right?" "Yes, sir." He tipped his head half a degree toward the kitchen corridor. "We'll stage outside. When you're ready." "Aye, sir." He turned for the door. No stomp, no flourish. The kind of exit that returns a house to its owner. The front door closed, the way good doors do once with purpose. Silence took the space he left and did not feel empty. It felt accurate. Amelia remained standing, hands empty, in a way I'd never seen. She looked down at the weapon-shaped absence on the table as if it might apologize for leaving. Dad sat slowly, like gravity had remembered him. Mom finally met my eyes and didn't look away. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply recognized me. That was enough for a breath. I placed my palms on Grandma's table and felt the grooves my grandfather's elbows had worn there. The house had outlived so many arguments, it didn't care to keep score. "Eat," Grandma said, voice steady now. No one moved. Boots on gravel outside found their rhythm. 4 Hummers, humming low engines, patient perimeter set. Authority had arrived, and true to form, had not auditioned. It had simply reset the map. Agent Rollins didn't ask for permission to speak. She owned it by being the only one with facts. She opened the slim folder she'd set between the lilies and the weaponless space and revealed glossy prints, barcodes, a redacted incident report with black lines marching across it like fences. She didn't push them at anyone. She let them sit there, available the way truth is when it doesn't have to perform. "Chief Caldwell," she began, tone crisp as paper. "The source you relied on is a private investigator without a Virginia license who misrepresented himself to a property manager and exploited a manual override on a secured storage container. He opened restricted containers, handled classified materials, and photographed federal assets linked to an active naval special warfare transfer." Amelia's mouth opened, then closed. "I was told—" "You were told what you wanted to hear," Rollins said. "No heat. You received photographs and unsworn statements, printed them, and disseminated them at a civilian gathering to justify detaining a federal officer. That is not chain of custody. That is not jurisdiction. That is not protection." Uncle Ray leaned forward to peer at the black bars. "What do the black lines mean?" "Those are redactions," Rollins said, patient as a nurse. "They mark information you are not cleared to see." "Then why show us anything?" Aunt Maggie blurted, affronted by the idea that a folder might withhold dessert. "Either tell us or don't." "We're telling you what's relevant," Rollins replied, "not what's salacious." Mom swallowed like she'd been holding water in her mouth for an hour. "Are you saying Amelia committed a crime?" "We're saying several statutes appear to be implicated," Rollins said, and slid a page closer to Amelia without touching her. "Unauthorized possession and distribution of federal property, obstruction of a classified transfer, unlawful detainment. There will be a review. You will be contacted." "Contacted," Amelia repeated softly as if the syllables could be negotiated. Dad's chair creaked. He pointed at the folder, at me, at the ceiling fan. "Anywhere blame might perch? If my daughter is an admiral, why keep it from us?" I looked at him. I could have answered 100 ways that might have soothed his pride or escalated his temper. I chose the one that matched the room. Because need to know isn't a kindness contest. He stared like I'd spoken a foreign language that sounded too much like common sense. Rollins turned a page. "The images of the crates you have in your folder were taken within a window when custody transfer was underway. They were tagged and triple-locked with documentation that validates every code on their sides. To anyone with clearance, they look exactly like what they are legal, logged interim storage. To anyone without, they can look like a scandal. Amelia's throat worked. I was protecting. Your narrative, I said, and immediately wished I hadn't. Words are tools. Sometimes they're also temptations. Her eyes flashed. Not anger. Recognition. The kind you get when the mirror refuses to flatter. Grandma shifted her hand to her water glass. If she's done wrong, you'll handle it, she told Rollins. It wasn't a question. It was a doctrine. Yes, ma'am. Rollins's voice softened by a half degree. Quietly, if people allow it to be. Cousin Jenna cleared her throat. What about the video I took? I didn't post. Don't, Rollins said. Still no heat. Please refrain from sharing content related to this matter. There are real-world implications. Jenna nodded, cheeks pinked by the idea that not everything is content. Delaney hadn't left the porch. You could feel his presence the way you feel a weather front through old windows. Command radiates not loud, not hot, but undeniable. It makes rooms honest. Amelia's shoulders, which had been pulled up like she was trying to make a necktie out of her muscles, probed for a new posture. Her voice came out like a test balloon that didn't want to pop. So, she's really what you said. Rear Admiral in the United States Navy. Rollins confirmed, then added something Amelia wasn't ready for. And your sister. That last word landed heavier than the rank. Families are unclassified. We pretend they aren't. Dad looked down at his hands like they'd deceived him. His fingers were clean nails trimmed. He's always been good at what he's good at, finishing a job, fixing a hinge, making beef taste like Sunday. He's never been good at the invisible work trust, uncertainty, love without ledger. He lifted his gaze and met mine. For once, he didn't perform certainty. He performed being a person. I thought you were playing dress up, he said, quiet, ashamed of the boyishness in that phrasing. I know, I said. It wasn't absolution. It was inventory. Aunt Maggie leaned toward Amelia like gossip could be a life preserver. You didn't know, she whispered, already rehearsing the defense. I didn't ask, Amelia said, voice cracking on the second word. Truth scrapes on the way out when it's been caged too long. Rollins gathered the pages into a stack that made no sound. Chief, you'll be given a time and place to provide a statement with counsel. Your service weapon remains logged until then. Do not contact the PI or discuss this matter with outside parties. We will contact you. Amelia nodded, small like agreement hurt. Mom finally stood, hands flat on the table, the way a person stands to make a vow she's not ready to say. She looked at me, and then at Amelia, and picked a sentence that didn't punish either of us. We will cooperate, she told Rollins. The we was the first accurate plural of the night. Rollins closed the folder and slid it back into her bag. Thank you. Outside engines idled in a patient line. The porch creaked under a weight that was neither threat nor invitation. It was just presence, the way a lighthouse is presence, even when the storm is still a rumor. I looked at Amelia and wished not for the first time that our lives had given us a version of love that didn't require winners. She stared at the empty place where her weapon had been and tried to make a new story out of absence. The badge on her belt looked smaller than it had an hour before. Authority without discipline is costume. She was learning that in real time. Lillian, she said, voice threadbare, why didn't you ever tell us? Because you didn't ask in a way that could hear the answer, I said. I didn't deliver it like a line. I delivered it like a fact. And because my job doesn't let me. Silence moved across the table, like shade at a cookout welcome overdue. Grandma dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin, and then placed it down with ceremony, like closing a service. We will eat, she declared. We will give statements. We will not put this on the internet. Yes, ma'am, Rollins said, and if she could have enlisted Grandma on the spot, she would have. Delaney stepped back in just enough for his voice to carry. Rear Admiral, he said, and the title felt less like theater and more like a hand on a shoulder. We'll stage until you're ready to depart. Aye, sir. I answered because some rhythms never stop feeling like heartbeat. Amelia rubbed her wrist where her badge had been tapping all night. Am I going to jail? Tonight, Rollins said. No, there will be a process. You'll be notified. Notified! Amelia repeated again, forcing the word to be a future she could survive. She sat down. Not at the head. In the nearest empty chair. The room rearranged itself around that fact. Dad cleared his throat, that masculine semaphore that admits nothing and asks everything. He pushed the plate toward me. You hungry? He asked, the only apology he knows how to cook. A little, I said, and took a roll. The bread was dry. I ate it anyway. You take what's offered when it's honest. Mom touched my sleeve. It was the first time that touch had felt like a bridge instead of a checkpoint. Will you stay the night? She asked, tentative, like we were both learning a new language? Or do you have to go with them? I'll stay for statements, I said. Then I have to go. Of course, she said, and the words meant I wish you didn't. Rollins looked at me. Admiral, do you wish to press charges personally? No, I said, choosing peace over satisfaction because peace lasts longer. Understood. The lilies smelled like a funeral that had been postponed. The chandelier didn't glitter. It shed light. The house felt like it remembered all the times it had been asked to hold both love and its many failures. It held. Houses do. Amelia stared at her hands. They were shaking now, not from fear, but from the sudden absence of a story to stand on. I felt something that wasn't triumph. It was relief that the next chapter would be written in a courtroom instead of over pot roast. The law is slower than gossip, but it keeps better records. Rollins gathered signatures with the efficiency of a woman who has shepherded 1,000 difficult rooms. She thanked Grandma first. She thanked Mom. She nodded to me last. Respect has its own order of operations. When the agents stepped back into the hallway, the radio found a hymn by accident, low, old, stubborn. Grandma smiled without meaning to. It sounded like a church where no one asks for details you aren't free to give. I stood palms, memorizing the table's grooves one last time. We're done here. I said not to end anything, but to mark the seam. Quiet isn't an exit. It's a hinge. Outside the night was a small-town night porch light, amber gravel honest engines waiting. The map had been redrawn, and no one had to bleed for it. We gave statements in the den, the room with the old piano no one tuned because it remembered how. Agent Rollins asked questions the way a seamstress takes measurements, no judgment exact. Mom answered with small words that didn't wobble. Uncle Ray tried to turn an anecdote into a map. Rollins let him finish, then set his story gently, where it couldn't hurt anyone. Aunt Maggie confessed to almost posting. Rollins thanked her for the almost like it was a donation. Amelia's turn came last. She sat straight hands, clasped badge gone, pistol logged. When asked for the PI's name, she gave it. When asked how she obtained the photos, she told the truth and winced. When asked why she chose dinner, she looked at Grandma, then at the lilies, and said, because she always comes to dinner. It was the closest she came to admitting the plan depended on love and ritual and a table that had fed us even when we didn't deserve it. Outside, the hummers idled like patient punctuation. Delaney waited on the porch, speaking into a phone quietly, the way men do when they won't let urgency become an excuse for sloppiness. When the last signature was gathered, he stepped inside just far enough for his voice to belong in the house again. We're set, he said. We'll roll in 5. Mom walked me to the hall like we were leaving a church potluck, not a federal intersection. She touched my sleeve and didn't remove her hand right away. I would have made a worse mess than Amelia given the chance, she said, eyes wet, but not spilling. I filled our quiet with the wrong people. Me too, I said. Different wrong people. She smiled, a tired curve that belonged to the girl who once learned to drive on gravel. Will you call me when you can't say anything, she asked. Yes, I said. I'll call and say nothing on purpose. That was our truce. Not forgiveness, not flowers. A plan. Dad hovered by the coat rack, pretending to help his own jacket find a hook. He cleared his throat and then remembered clearing his throat hadn't worked all night. You want a sandwich for the road? He asked. Maybe next time, I said, and meant it. the way a man means he'll patch your roof when the rain passes. He nodded. You looked steady, he said, like it surprised him that steadiness had a shape. Training, I said. Yeah? He rubbed his jaw, finding his way around a sentence he'd never practiced. I was wrong. It wasn't a confession. It was a correction. I accepted it as both. Grandma pressed a wrapped slice of pound cake into my hand because love needs something to do besides ache. Don't let important people forget to eat, she instructed, which is her way of telling me to remind admirals and agents they are human too. I won't, I said. Amelia stood by the dining room doorway like someone who didn't know if she should enter the room she had arranged. Her eyes were tired in the way only consequence makes a person tired. When I moved past, she spoke without lifting her head. I was jealous, she said, and I was afraid. I thought if I could name you in front of everyone, I'd stop feeling like I'd been left out of the story. You weren't left out, I said. You were just in a different chapter. I made myself the headline, she said small. It wasn't mine. There are apologies that ask for absolution and apologies that ask for permission to grow. This was the second kind. Talk to your counsel, I said, then come help Grandma on Sundays, quietly. She laughed once, a short, broken sound. Quietly, she repeated as if the word had finally offered her a seat. On the porch, Delaney watched the street the way you watch a patient wait calm, certain. Rear Admiral, he said with a nod that held both respect and the reminder that the road waits. We'll take you to base. Debrief will be light. Reports tomorrow. Aye, sir. He looked past me at the house, at Grandma behind the glass, at Mom turning off the chandelier, at Amelia sitting in a chair that wasn't the head, at Dad pretending the porch light needed his supervision. Good bones, he said, meaning the structure had endured what the night asked of it. Strong table, I answered. We rolled out without spectacle. No sirens, no bravado. Chesterville returned to itself, porch lights, dogs reconsidering their fences, a church sign promising Wednesday's spaghetti supper. In the back seat, I let the engine's steady complaint smooth the edges of my wrists. I texted Piper a single word, clear. She sent back the thumbs up she hates using and a line that made me smile. Next time, let us RSVP to dinner sooner. The base smelled like coffee and work. We slid through the gate. The sentry saluted Delaney and tried not to stare at me like a news headline. Inside debrief was exactly what good debriefs are: boring, accurate brief. I confirmed the sequence, what I saw, what I didn't. No theories, no flourishes. Systems prefer facts. I slept that night in a room that understood privacy. In the morning, I ran the perimeter in air that tasted like winter, deciding whether to stay. My wrists had bloomed 2 clean bands of bruise, nothing dramatic. Pain is an invoice. I paid it and moved on. In the weeks that followed, rumors thinned into facts. Amelia accepted a suspension pending review. The PI found himself inconveniently visible to people who take paperwork seriously. Mom called on Tuesdays and said nothing beautifully. Dad sent me a photo of a repaired hinge with the caption, "It holds." Grandma mailed a clipping of a hymn we accidentally liked. On Sundays, when I could, I called Grandma and let the radio on her counter talk about rain and soybeans. If I couldn't call, I sent her a voice message that said, "Eat while it's hot," and she sent one back that said, "Don't rise to it." Rituals rebuild what pride ruins. The day NCIS closed the family portion of the file, Rollins wrote a note that read like a receipt. "We appreciate your restraint." I pinned it behind my desk where only I could see it. A reminder that power should be quieter than the room it corrects. At a change of command, a month later, I stood at attention while another officer accepted a post I'd been keeping warm. The flag moved, the way flags move, like memory, like promise. After a young lieutenant with hands too big for his sleeves approached and said his mother had watched a sister tear a family in two over a will. "How do you fix it?" he asked. "You don't," I said. "You stop bleeding in places no one can see, and you stop asking people to clap for wounds they don't believe in. Then you do your job well enough that your quiet is louder than their noise." He nodded like he'd been given a password. Maybe he had. I visited Grandma on a Saturday when the sky put on its best blue. We played cribbage. She beat me, like always. On my way out, she tucked a folded paper into my pocket. It was a grocery list. Eggs, milk, pound, cake, patience. Don't forget the last one, she said. I won't, I promised. 2 months later, Amelia knocked on Grandma's door with a bag of mulch and a borrowed humility. She planted lilies that didn't smell like a verdict. She sat and let Grandma correct her grip on the trowel like she was 12 again. She went with Mom to fix the church bulletin printer. She learned that reconciliation is not a headline. It's a schedule. Dad started packing me sandwiches that tasted the same as when I was 15 and angry. He didn't say I love you. He said turkey or ham, and then I added mustard because it helps. Men like him tell the truth with condiments. When people ask what the moral is, I give them something simple enough to carry in a pocket. Truth doesn't need volume authority, doesn't need theater, and family doesn't need an audience to become decent. Ask better questions. Respect, need to know. When you're wrong, correct. When you're right, be kind. And if you must choose between noise and discipline, choose discipline. It ages better. If you're listening to this in a kitchen that knows your arguments by heart, here's your invitation. Take a breath lower, your voice, check your facts, and pass the rolls. Protect what's worth protecting with paperwork, with patience, with presence. If this story stirred something, share it with someone who needs a quieter kind of strength tonight. And if you want more stories where silence wins and decency gets the last line, follow along. We'll keep the porch light on.